When the Second World War finally ended in 1945, the world believed the violence had stopped. Armies laid down their weapons, borders shifted, governments collapsed, and millions tried to return to the lives they once knew. But the war had created wounds that did not simply close with the sound of a ceasefire. Across Europe, millions were displaced, traumatized, starving, or grieving. Cities were destroyed, and families were scattered. Among those wandering the ruined continent were countless survivors of Nazi concentration camps, men and women who had endured years of brutality, starvation, forced labor, humiliation, and the constant threat of death. Their bodies were damaged, their minds were deeply wounded, and many had no homes, families, or futures left. It is in this world of pain, confusion, and shattered identity that the story of a man named Peter Chemy unfolded. Peter Chemy was a Polish Jew, a survivor of some of the harshest and most brutal Nazi camps. His experience had left him physically weakened and emotionally broken. Like thousands of other survivors, he was liberated by American troops who entered the camps at the end of the war. Liberation was supposed to be a moment of joy, but for many survivors it arrived with confusion, shock, and emotional numbness. Years of suffering had carved deep wounds that did not disappear with freedom. Survivors suddenly found themselves standing outside the camp gates with nowhere to go, carrying nothing but memories of the horrors they had witnessed. Their families were often dead, their homes destroyed, and their communities erased. Survival was no longer about enduring brutality. It had become the challenge of rebuilding a life that no longer existed. After being liberated in 1945, Peter Chemy wandered through Germany. He had no home to return to, no relatives to embrace, and no belongings except the clothes given to him by relief workers. He lived with the physical pain that camp survivors carried for the rest of their lives, and he lived with an internal anger that many could not escape. He had survived, but survival did not erase what he had seen. In the camps, he had watched people die every day. He had been treated as less than human. He had carried heavy loads, lived in freezing weather, watched people beaten, and seen families separated. Years of humiliation, starvation, and violence had left a mark that he struggled to control. Many survivors left Germany immediately after liberation, hoping to reach relatives in other countries or finding refuge in displaced persons camps. But Peter Chemy did not have a clear path forward. He wandered from town to town in the American occupation zone, and in this period of wandering, he encountered a German family who would change the course of his life. The family consisted of a husband, a wife, and their young daughter. They saw Chemy not as an enemy or a criminal, but as a human being in desperate need. Food was scarce in Germany in 1945, and many families struggled to provide for themselves. Yet this family looked at the wandering survivor with compassion. They understood he was starving, they understood he was alone, and they chose to help him. They offered him a warm meal, likely a rare thing in the ruined post-war world. They gave him a bed to sleep in and treated him with kindness. Their actions were simple gestures, but in a world recovering from hatred, these gestures were rare. But inside Peter Chemy, something was still broken. The years of suffering had left him unable to separate individual Germans from the system that had destroyed his life. He saw not a kind family, but people who belonged to the nation that had overseen his suffering. For survivors like him, hatred was not an abstract feeling. It was shaped by years of dehumanization, violence, hunger, cold, and fear. His memories were not distant or softened by time. They were fresh and raw. Survivors often struggled emotionally and psychologically for the rest of their lives. Many felt moments of anger, confusion, and bitterness, even toward people who had done nothing personally to harm them. The mind tries to make sense of trauma, and sometimes it reaches for explanations that come from pain rather than reason. That night, while the family slept, Peter Chemy picked up an axe inside their home. Instead of seeing them as individuals who had shown compassion, he saw them as symbols of the suffering he had endured. In a moment shaped by anger and trauma, he attacked them while they slept. The husband, the wife, and the little girl were all killed. The act was horrific not only because of the violence, but because of the heartbreaking irony that a family who had chosen kindness became victims of a man who had lost control of the wounds inside him. When the murders were discovered, the American military police arrested Chemy. Germany at that time was divided into Allied occupation zones, and the American zone handled legal cases involving crimes committed within its territory. The American authorities recognized Chemy as a Holocaust survivor, and they understood the suffering he had endured. But they also recognized that 3 innocent people had been murdered. They were faced with the painful reality that the war had created victims on all sides, and justice had to apply even in cases shaped by trauma and tragedy. The Americans placed Chemy on trial. During the trial, the court heard details of Chemy's suffering in the concentration camps. They understood that he had endured experiences that no human being should face. They acknowledged that trauma had shaped his actions. But the court also understood that the law could not ignore what he had done. The German family had shown kindness. They had fed him, sheltered him, and treated him with dignity. The court concluded that their innocence could not be dismissed simply because Chemy had suffered under the Nazis. The murder of civilians, especially a child, could not be justified. As a result, the American military court sentenced him to death. The sentence was carried out in January 1947 at Landsberg Prison, the same prison where many Nazi officials had been executed for their crimes. Chemy was executed by firing squad, a method used by the Allied forces for military executions. His case became a stark reminder that the end of the war did not immediately bring peace to the hearts of those who survived it. Trauma continued to influence actions. Anger could erupt in unpredictable ways. The boundaries between victim and perpetrator could shift painfully in the world that emerged after 1945. The story of Peter Chemy is one of those rare historical accounts that forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the aftermath of war does not move in simple lines. The end of a conflict does not erase the pain that people carry. Justice is not always neat or easy. The world in 1945 and 1946 was filled with displaced persons, broken families, lost children, and traumatized survivors. Many who had been victims of one injustice sometimes found themselves punished for actions that arose from years of suffering. The courts had to balance understanding with accountability, compassion with responsibility. The tragedy touches multiple layers. It reflects the psychological toll of the Holocaust, where survivors often found themselves unable to reintegrate into normal life quickly. It reflects the complexity of guilt and innocence in a world where the line between them had been blurred by years of war. It reflects the challenges faced by Allied occupation authorities, who had to establish justice in a chaotic and emotionally charged environment. It also reminds us that compassion can sometimes end in tragedy when the person receiving it is drowning in trauma. The German family that took in Chemy acted with kindness in a time when kindness was scarce. Their deaths illustrate the unpredictable consequences of wartime suffering and how deep psychological wounds can erupt suddenly. Modern historians discuss Chemy's case not to condemn him or to excuse him, but to understand the psychological aftermath of extreme trauma. Survivors of atrocities often struggle with rage, guilt, nightmares, and emotional numbness. Some lash out, others withdraw, and many try to rebuild their lives quietly. Chemy's case is an extreme example of trauma manifesting in violence, and it offers insight into the broader emotional and psychological landscape of post-war Europe. The courts believed that justice required accountability. They acknowledged that Chemy was a victim of horrific crimes, but they also recognized that 3 innocent people had been murdered without cause. Their decision reflects the difficult balance the Allies attempted to maintain in the post-war world. The recognition of suffering without allowing suffering to justify new atrocities. The execution of Peter Chemy in 1947 marked the end of a tragic chain of events that began in the camps and ended in a German home where compassion met trauma in the worst possible way. His story stands as a painful reminder that war leaves behind scars that do not heal quickly. Even after liberation, even after victory, even after the world tried to rebuild, the consequences of the war continued to echo in the actions of those who survived it. In studying cases like this, historians learn that the end of war does not mean the end of violence. It means the beginning of a long and difficult recovery. The human mind does not reset when the fighting stops. For some, the emotional battles continue long after the political ones have ended. And for a small number like Peter Chemy, Those internal battles can lead to decisions that create new tragedies in a world already filled with them. This story remains deeply informative because it offers a window into the emotional and psychological costs of war, the complexities of justice, and the unpredictable behavior of individuals who have experienced extreme trauma. It shows how war often damages people in ways that society must confront long after the last shot is fired. And it demonstrates that the line between victim and perpetrator is not always simple when trauma is involved. In remembering the story of Peter Chemy and the family who tried to help him, we confront the broader truth that the aftermath of the Second World War was not only about rebuilding nations, but also about understanding the profound damage done to individuals. The tragedy reminds us that even after liberation, suffering continued in ways that were often hidden, unpredictable, and difficult to understand.